Okay, class. So this is supposed to be the recap or very short video. Just only to give you a clarification or give you some more further idea what we have learned in chapter 2. In chapter 2, we talk about thinking like economics. So simply we want to know about how does economics try to study or to explain about the real world, to explain about the economy in a society. And this is how we started to look at the very basic idea as we already learned that economics as a scientist, so simply we will look on this matter. And we already learned that as a scientist, your role is simply trying to conduct the experiment, try to conduct the testing. Of course, as we, okay, the 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 one who conduct as a scientist, we not really like those who study or who wear a lab coat or try to mix our experiment with a different chemical substance, or whether we test our medicine on any living creature. But we in here, our testing will simply focus on data, on information. So this is how we trying to capture and trying to understand about the way that the scientists use the data for experiment or testing. Now we will use a very basic model that we just learned in our course, which is known to be a production possibility frontier. And this is what I arrange in here. It's just like one platform for you to play around with the data to see how does the item change, to make you feel like this is the way that we do as a scientist, the way that we can do the experiment to see what is the changes impact with our information that we have, and how do we explain the real world. Now, talking back about the concept of production possibility frontier, we have the idea that we need to have the production. Now, in our case, we have two kinds of production or two kinds of creation that we create. One is watch a movie, the other one is doing homework. And for our possibility, this is the possibility of all kind of product that we can create when we use up the full amount of resources that we have. And the last part is supposed to be the frontier. So you will see this is a idea that we can see here. This is the frontier that you can check inside our study. Now move back. What do we talk about the production possibility frontier? In the way that we set a model, you need to have the assumption. And the assumption is to make your model easy to understand, or to get it very simply idea about what we're looking. So now in our case, normally in production possibility frontier, you require to set like uh, one kind of the items or one kind of resources, and then you need to have two kind of products that you need to work on. So what are those the resource that we put in our study? Is supposed to be time. And what are the items that we want to create? We have the movie that we want to watch, and then homework that we want to finish. So let's make very simple. Is that every time you watch a movie, it requires you to spend around 2 hours, and every time you need to complete one exercise of homework, you need to spend 1 hour. And the total amount of hour that you should have is supposed to be 24 hours. So right now, I want you to look and see this one very quickly, because you can try to read all of explanation in detail. So normally if you have 24 hours that you have here, these are all of the combination. You can see that the total hour that you use is that you use all of the 24 hours. And you can use it to create whether you want to watch a movie, whether you want to do the homework. But if you decided to do all of the homework within that 24 hours, you can create up to 24 homeworks. If you decided to watch the movie within that 24 hours, you can simply watch up to 12 movies. So if anything lie between here, that you decide to watch a movie and do the homework at the same time, so how many movie can you watch and how many homework can you finish? And this is how we say that if we decided to spend everything that we have, and these are all the combination of different kind of way that you decided to watch a movie or to do homework within that 24 hour, it gives you all of this idea, the possibility of what you can do. But in reality, you can only do at one point here. If you decided, for example, to watch 4 movies, meaning that you spend the rest of the remaining time, okay, to do homework. So simply you only do one at a time. You cannot do all of this at one time because these are showing like a multiple option or multiple choice that you can pick among all of these items here. But these are all of the items that to show you that okay, whenever you use up every the resources that you have within okay within what you need to use it. So right now you can see that there's a few things you can play around in here. The first thing, just ignore about the green, okay, this green line first. We only focus about this blue line and then this one of this orange dot. So in the orange dot, normally this is represent the point or the one thing that I mentioned. You can only choose among okay to do the actual task, only one of this. But you can choose any other thing beside this as well. That's why I let you to play around with this one. Let's say that you decided to watch in here 5 movie and 10 homework and do 10 homework. So you can see that in our case that you decide to do something like this. It tells you the amount of time that you have used, and this is supposed to be 20 hours. But remember that you have up to 24 hours. So we assume that the remaining 4 hours you just use for sleeping. And in our case, we assume that the idea that you sleep, it refers to the concept that you waste your time. So you waste your time away for 4 hours doing nothing, and you should use that 4 hours that be able to watch more movie or decided to do more homeworks. So if you decided to play around in this and try to move around in any different number, you simply see that the point here we started to run around inside the graph. Okay, the orange dot we started to run around inside this graph. Now this is something that you can play around. And in order to understand about why we need to learn about production possibility frontier, you need to learn about two things that we want to understand is about our efficiency and our feasibility. So if I add or I create something like before I say that we decided to watch 5 movies and then we decided to complete 8 homeworks. Now in this point, you can see that we don't use everything that we have. You see that we don't use everything that we have. So in that case, it is feasible for us to do it because it within that 24 hours. But it somehow it's inefficient. You don't use every resources. We just let our resource to waste. Okay. And if you decide to change to watch, let's say 8 movies and then you do 8 homeworks, you see that this time it moves into a position that is running along this line, which this line we call the production possibility frontier. You simply see that in terms of our efficiency, it's very efficient. And in terms of our feasibility, we still be able to do that because we have a total 24 hours and we use up these 24 hours. So this is exactly the position that we really want to maintain and to achieve in our study. But how about if we decided to, let's say, watch 10 movies and then do 8 homeworks? This time, the point is moving outside of the production possibility frontier. And we think that it is efficient for us to be able to create the most product that we have. But the problem is that we don't really have enough resource to do it. You have only 24 hours, but you decided to use up to 28 hours, which is something that out of your capacity, out of your ability. And in that case, you can see to understand, to play around in this one, to know that every time if you want to create a lot of product in economy, but if we don't have capacity to do it, we cannot be able to think of that. But if we decided to create product in the whole economy, and simply if you don't use every resource that we have, we will let the resource to waste away. So simply what are those resources? You remember that resource will be accounted by the number of labors that you have, the amount of capitals that you have, and also the land, which is a very basic resource that we learn as the factors of production. And if we let all of those resources to waste away, meaning that there might be some people that are not going to work and they just do nothing in their life. There might be some machine, some equipment, some building that we have, but we just leave it out to become deteriorate, or it will later on around 10 or 20 more years. If you don't use that, it will no longer be able to use either, even we don't really use it. So we just waste your resources by doing nothing. So that's why we don't really want to do that in the economy. and this help you to get some idea that to be able to use the most efficient one and to utilize everything that we have is the most the best scenario that we want to see inside this economy. But if you decide to understand that what happens if we decide to change our resources, whether you want to add more resource or whether you try to just only change it to increase the number of resource from, let's say, 24 to 30. So in our case is that you can see the production possibility frontier will start to change, and you will make this one to compare whenever you try to create or change anything, whether you subtract the amount of resource that you have, or simply whether you're trying to increase the amount of resource that you have. You can see that it start to move, whether it become get smaller or become bigger than before. So assuming, for example, like in the position that you have more resources inside the economy, so that means it represents for the point. For instance, if I write something like it's 10 movie and 8 homeworks, you can see that the position in the past, we say that in this part, it is not possible to do it. But if we go back and reflect our new production possibility frontier status, we can check in the bottom, and you can see in here, this time it is feasible. And even though it's feasible, you still not use up everything. Because why? Because the next one, you can use up to 30 hours, but then you decide to spend only 28 hours. So in that case, you not use up every resources for our new frontier that we have, our new resource that we have. But comparing to the past, which is the beginning of our original position, we have only 24 hours. In that case, within that 24 hours, you cannot do it by spending up to 28. But with 30, you can do that. So you can see that when the economy starts to grow, we expand our resources, whether we have more labor, whether we have more capital, whether we have more any kind of technology, which help us to be able to grow and to expand our production. The more that we increase our economy, the more we develop our capacity to create production, then you can see that the more product that we can produce in comparison to the past. So this is something that you can play around to check about the different number to see whether we have the full capacity to do it or not. The second part of our study is involving a little bit of technical involvement with the mathematical equation, but this is not really something that very difficult, and I have already explained to you inside our course. So I don't want to waste a lot of time in this, and simply just only to remind you that a slope inside the graph, this is a slope. Usually the line here, the whole line here is represent the idea of slope, and slope simply means the change in y over the change in x. And what you need to do is simply try to identify or label what x is about and what is y about. And in our case, we study about the connection between the number of student absent relating to the final exam score. So simply the slope, it talk about the change in x over the change in y over the change in x. So the slope here should meaning in our case is that the connection between the amount of students are absent and their score. So we simply want to know that whenever you tend to be absent or you increase your absent one more time, so how much score would you likely lose, or how does it affect to your total score? In our case like this. Normally the slope we have a different kind of shape, different kind of position. Sometimes we talk about a positive slope, or we call the upward sloping. And the other one we talk about the negative slope, or we call a downward sloping. Now to tell you is that if we talk about the slope that show the connection or relation between two kind of things, so simply a positive slope can be explained about something like this. The relationship between the rate of cancer and the number of smoking. So simply mean that if you tend to smoke more, there will be a higher rate or higher chance for you to get a cancer. But if you decide to smoke less, meaning that there is a lower chance for you to get a cancer. So you can see that one increase, the other also increase. One decrease, the other also decrease. But if you look inside the other part is about the negative slope, is talk about the relationship that is contrast. the relationship between a level of education and unemployment. So simply mean that the higher level of education, the lower rate of your unemployment, and the lower rate of the low level of education, the higher rate of unemployment. Something like this is to show the contrast relationship. So you can just simply look at how we calculate and do all of this just as an example. I suggest you do that. I have already explained to you in our class. So that's why the only exercise that you can just play around and try to find your own slope based on the information we have here. It's not very difficult, and simply just tell me what is the result that you get from this one. It's not really your homework, but it's just only your practice. So anyone, if you have free time, you can just try to do it and try to test out what you have learned from our case here. Now, the last part is to relax the assumption. Now, we already talked about that the meaning of the model is the simplified version of the reality. And simplified version meaning that the simple the model is, the way that it's moved away from the reality. So if we try to make a model become more complex, it will help to capture reality more accurately. But the problem is that it will lead you to find it hard to understand about that model. So that is how we can say the trade-off. Now look here. In our first model is the most simplified model because of why? Because we always assume that every movie is going to be involved with 2 hours. But in reality, movie can be varied, can be changed, and the length of the movie can be different. And the ability of the students or anyone who's going to do their homework are going to be different as well. Depend on their ability to to do it, their skills, their knowledge, and many other actors that involve to affect the time that you're going to do your homework. So this is what we tell you that it doesn't capture what exactly reality look like, but this tell you about a certain concept between two kind of product that we have. But right now when we relax our model a little bit and to make it a little bit more complicated, you will see that the production possibility frontier that we look in the past, usually in reality it's not going to have this kind of shape, but it's supposed to have the bowl shaped curve. A bowl shaped curve is the idea that you can see here as a curve, and simply you can see this is a combination of the new product that we talk about is between a bike and a beer. So in the whole economy we have two industry in our new assumption, and this time we try to talk a little bit and make sense of reality, because those who can create bike might not have their specialization in creating beer, and simply those who know how to create a bottle of beers, they might not have the ability or capacity to create a bike. So this is how we can start to see more it capture the reality and to show you the combination of product if we actually allocate the resources. Now in here we no longer try to look at what is the actual input that we have, because it's going to be much more complicated to know how we can allocate to all of these resources. But we just only know exactly that this is how the resources we could build or create it if we have a certain amount of input. Now in here, let's say that our production we have both the labor, the capital, and the land. So simply we see that at the beginning of the point in this part, whenever we decided to create all beer, whenever you decide to create all beer, that means that we need to use every people who also know how to create bike, because we use up every resources, so we need to transfer for those who can also create bike to move and create a beer. Now you can see that the meaning of the slope I already mentioned, so you can simply look at our label here and to make sense out of it. But you can see what, whenever we try to move, this one to create all beer, of course we think that inside our model that we say we want to reach the production possibility frontier, and 500 in here it locate at the production possibility frontier, but that is not really exactly what we want as well. Simply if you look here, now every time that you begin to change from creating beer and just allocate some of the resources, move back to create a bike. So you can see what is the difference. This time in this position between here to here, you can see that whenever you shift some of your resources, you just only forgo your chance to create 5 beers you give up 5 beers, but you can exchange with a person who can create up to 66 bikes. Now, why it worked in that way? Because this time we might shift a person who actually know how to create bike, and they start to move from creating beer, and then they can start to create a bike. So in that case, you can see in our slope that we represent in here, we say that it equal to minus 0.08. So it does mean that every time that we want to create one more bike, we only need to give up 8% of beer. Simply meaning that maybe that one person can create one bike, but that one person can only create 8% of the beer, because they have their specialization only in creating bike. So doing like this, if we shift our economy not only to create only beer, but decided to create both beer and bikes, and we just shift our specialization of those who know how to create bike to do their bike, so we can get more product. And the same thing, you can keep moving like this until the point that you see that if we try to allocate everyone to create bike, meaning that those who know how to create beer no longer be able to do it. And this is why those who used to create their beer, they need to give up all of their ability to create the beer and then go to create bike. So meaning that you forgo around 100 amount of beer just only to be able to create 3 bikes. So of course, we know that in economy, we want to be able to reach our capacity, but we not also consider that every capacity is our most favorable or the most suitable outcomes that we need to have. So we also later on, of course, right now we not yet learn how to find which area that is the best one that we want to create, but at least it helps to understand that not all of the point inside the production possibility frontier, it tells you that it's the best option, but you need to find which location inside this production possibility frontier as well to know which one that you want to create the most product out of it. So this is how you can see in reality the same thing. We don't want to use those who study in law field to become a doctor, and those who study a doctor to work as a lawyer, because we don't really use the knowledge or the skills of the worker efficiently, and this is how we study in the economy. And before we end, remember that in the book they mentioned the production possibility frontier, the slope of the production possibility frontier here, the value of this slope here, it represents the meaning of the opportunity cost. So that means you can see that what is the opportunity cost of creating one bike in here is that the number of the bottle that you need to give up is supposed to be 0.08. What is in this point, what is the opportunity cost of creating one bike is supposed to be 33 bottle of beer. Now you will notice inside our graph, inside this graph, at the beginning point, this is the first slope, from this point, from point 1 to point 2, this is the representation of the first slope. And actually this is not a curve, this is a line, because we connect from this point to this point. This is a line. And in this line, you can see that the direction of the slope is very flat. It's flat, and the flat slope, you can see that it has a very low value. And whenever you see at the bottom, the slope itself, you can see connect from the last 2 points, it's very steep. And when the slope have a steep nature, it tends to have a very high value. And it told you the same thing, because in here is what? Whenever the slope is flat, it tells you that whenever you tend to create one item in the x-axis, you only need to forgo a small amount of item in y. You can see here, whenever you create any item in the x-axis, you only need to forgo a very small amount of the items in y-axis. But whenever the slope itself is very steep, you can see that every time you create one item inside the x-axis, one item inside the x-axis, you will need to forgo a huge amount of items in the y-axis. So this is just only to give you some idea about the value of the slope and the picture of the slope, what you can see in the actual graph. So this is all for a video of the day, and hopefully you can get it for those who missed the class, and hopefully that will help to get you more idea and to understand that why do we require to use a mathematics and graph or any kind of model to explain about the real world. So thank you so much everyone for listening to this video, and I hope everyone well prepared for our next class. Okay, so see you everyone.